Alright, hello viewers. Today is a very hot and humid afternoon, and I would like to start off talking about this 2009 SCION TC. It has came in here before for a lower end rebuild because the customer's engine at some point starved. It burnt or consumed enough oil to where it ran dry and destroyed the bearings, and it was knocking pretty hard. So he brought it in and I went ahead and replaced the main bearings and the connecting rod bearings, and then from there on forward, no problems, except that there was an unknown issue afterwards of a very excessive, which leads to or ties into this issue or underlying issue, which is the oil consumption. At first, we believe it was simply because of a known issue of these engines, the 2AZFE, if I'm not mistaken. This engine has a known oil consumption issue, but we believe at this point there is an abnormal oil consumption issue, and as soon as I pulled the spark plugs out, cylinder number 1 has a heavy deposit of oil and all around it, thus making us believe that the issue is somewhere in there that's burning the oil through. It can be the piston rings, it can be dry rotted or burnt valve stem seals, elongated valve guides, or all the above, who knows. So what we're going to do is tear down the engine this time. We're going to pull the engine completely out, put it on an engine stand, tear it all the way down, and rebuild it back to spec, also known as blueprinting. Everything's going to be measured, everything's going to be mic'd, and we're going to rebuild it, and hopefully it'll run as long as it already has. The engine or the vehicle has 165,000 miles at this point, and I want to show you what I'm going to be working with, which is this vehicle right here. I'm going to pull this engine out, as well as I have another challenge in between, which is the fact that once I pull this engine out, my space in the garage is very limited, and I'll show you that. I have barely enough space to walk by. There's a little bit more space over there in the front, so I will have the engine over there. But to manage with all the other parts like the battery, exhaust manifold, intake manifold, surrounding components and such, I'm going to bring it all the way to the back of the vehicle, and I have cleared the trunk or hatch area. And as you can see, I laid down heavy duty bags to prevent any dirt, oil, grime, what have you, come in contact with the interior of the vehicle. And the owner did have a box here, a sub, and I disconnected it and brought it inside the house. The vehicle as of now has 5 codes. A check engine light does not pop up on the dash, although a maintenance required light does pop up, and I hooked up my scanner and they populated, and they are 4 out of the 5 codes are 1 for every tire pressure monitor sensor, and the last one, the 5th one, is for a brake switch. So those are the codes that were existent before this whole maintenance about to happen, and I would like to show you the engine running as well. The only issues that the car has as of now is a very slight miss during idle and a stutter or miss during normal driving conditions. So that leads us to believe that has to do with the ongoing issue of the oil consumption, probably draining or choking the combustion process in cylinder number 1. So I'm going to go ahead and crank it up just for documentation purposes. and we can record the mileage as well. 165,268. All right, I had already cranked the engine previously, so it's kind of warmed up already. You see right here I have a maintenance required, and the tire pressure monitor sensor light is on and flashing. Let's go back to the engine bay. I believe I'm unable to rev the engine from in here because it has an electronic throttle body. It idles very quiet. You can kind of hear a slight miss, very faint, but it may also be just because of how quiet the engine is. You're hearing there the other rotating components happening there. All right, so this is the first part of the video. It's just an introduction. I had somewhat of a shop before in a better setup in my garage until I moved here. So I would like to document this to maybe aid or motivate those who have the same problem or similar issue and they are limited in space, to show you guys that it's still possible to conduct a very proficient maintenance. Conduct very proficient maintenance with limited space. So I'm going to record as much as I can, and just stay tuned. Alright, I went ahead and removed the two terminals right off the battery. Then I'm going to go ahead and remove these two screws, take the bracket off, and I'm going to keep the bracket as an assembly. The less parts you have loose, the more parts you have consolidated, the easier it is to put it back together, and the less mess you create whenever you have to organize it in a spot if you were working like me with tight real estate constraints. So the next step, you're going to see this battery disconnected. Alright, let me just go ahead and apologize beforehand. I'm recording with a phone. I don't have a high-tech camera. I'm just a low-budget kind of guy. Not really, it's just I don't have a high-tech camera right now. So you're just going to have to deal with this. Alright, so I disconnected the two ears that connect at the bottom of these rods that are securing the battery, your battery tie down. And this is what I'm talking about. Just keep it one piece. So at this point, all I have to do is remove the battery, the bracket, and then I'm going to put it over there in the back of the hatch and continue on with the next step. Right, at this point, the battery and the tie down has been removed. Now I'm going to remove this bracket because at the time my intention as of now is to remove the long block along with the transmission as one coming up. So I want as much clearance as I can get. So I'm going to remove this bracket because it's slightly getting in the way right here, and it is secured by 1, 2, 3, and 4 bolts. So once I remove that, it looks like possibly 5 bolts. There's a grounding strap right underneath this bracket, and once that's removed, we'll go on to the next step. Alright, the tray has been removed. It is in fact just 4 bolts. As you can see, this is how it mounts. It's 4 bolts, and then that 5th one is not mounted to the tray. It is mounted as a grounding wire from the harness down to the frame. Now I'm going to show you a technique of what I've done for the last probably decade, and I've never had an issue with the hardware, and probably should take note. Alright, as soon as I take the hardware off, I grab a Ziploc bag and I put my hardware in the bag. And as you can see right here, you want to be detailed as possible in that bag as far as identifying what the bolts go to. So I put battery tray bolts times 4. So now I know 4 bolts I removed from the bracket. And I don't put all my bags into one box because you may forget, and if you're not very detailed in your description, you may even confuse yourself with what goes where. So just keep the hardware right next to the component that it got removed. Option 2, which I've done this as probably as many times as I've used the bag, is those 4. If I were not to use the bag method, those 4 mounting bolts, I would put it right back where it came out of. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Just kind of hand thread them in, and that way you are unable to put the bracket unless you remove the hardware that belongs where it exactly came off of. So those are the two methods that are very effective. So we'll just move on. There's no, one thing I would like to point out, the way I'm removing everything to access the removal of the long block, there's no specific method, or what I'm trying to say is there's no fixed way on how to get to the steps. So I'm just doing what I feel the step after step should be. You can follow the field service manual, or factory service manual I should say, and if you want to go step by step, but I'm just going off of what I feel comfortable with. Let's say today, if I only have a few hours worth of working, I'm just going to go in and hit up a few, whether instead of tackling a bigger job, which I know I'm going to need more hours. I kind of like to get to good stopping points before I just leave something halfway. I only leave things halfway done or undone if I really am attempting to get it removed, and just sometimes before you remove one component, you have to remove another. Before you remove that one, you have to disconnect other things, and that can take a little bit of time. So I'm just starting off with the little things on top and around until I get to the major components. And let's just get to the next step. I'm going to remove this intake manifold. So it's going to be these mounting struts. It looks kind of aftermarket, very movable. You already see some scratches right here from vibration probably, but it's going to require a few sensors disconnected. And the good thing about vehicle sensors, for the most part, most manufacturers have dedicated sizes, so I wouldn't worry about too much identifying or tagging what sensors go where, because just by the location and the restriction on how far they can go, it's only going to go to this one. There's no other sensor that looks alike. Let's say, for example, if the crank angle sensor would be the same housing, it's nowhere close to it, so you only have to worry about it. So what I'm trying to say is, don't worry about too much of unlooming the wire harness and identifying it. They go where they belong. There's no confusion there, at least for this car as well. All right, let's go. I'll show you the next step is going to be taking this off. There's going to be a few vacuum lines, the coupling, and we'll get to the next step. All right, I'm going to go ahead and remove this valve cover shroud, and it allows me more access, or easier access, to mess with this vacuum hose that I don't have too much I don't have too much space to manipulate it, to remove that vacuum hose, to remove this intake. Although this is a custom intake manifold, I'm just going to show you I decided to remove it from here, from the very bottom coupling, and of course from the last mount that would be securing this. Reason I removed it from here and not from here is because as I remove it, I would clear more components or hoses having to or potentially be in the way as I'm removing this engine. So that way it's still secured, it's still in its position, so then at the time of rebuild or reassembly, it's already lined up, and then I don't have to remember what this hose goes to, or I don't have to tag it. Also, remember my other method I explained? I opt for that one with this valve cover shroud. Decided to put those two nuts right on there because they're not going to be in the way of anything else anymore, and it keeps me from having to make a bag and tag for something so simple. All right. So the next step I'm going to do is start removing this wire harness. Everything that has to do electrical, start unlooming it and pulling it out of the way. All right, I want to show you at least a little progress that I made real quick. Just removed these 4 from the harness. Again, remember what I explained, you just got to follow the harness and look at what it's all hooked up to. So you got your 4 coils, and then this harness branches off to the back, which I just disconnected the 4 injector connectors, and then lastly it would go all the way back here to this last connector, which goes to your variable valve timing solenoid. And lastly, one branches off to the side, hooks up to your intake manifold right there, and then goes to your electronic throttle body right there. So then at that point, this whole loom from this section disconnected, and I'm just going to work in reverse order. Kind of start, you want to start from the furthest all the way out, and then as soon as you remove the whole harness, you can bundle it up over here on the side, fold it neatly, what have you, start clearing up some space. Alright, well, I believe this video wouldn't be as helpful if I don't go through every step of the way. So at this point, I removed this harness mount assembly right here. There is a number of sensors. I believe down here I have the coolant temperature sensor, the pressure sensor for the coolant, if I'm not mistaken, as well. This is just a housing for a sensor. It looks like it might be a temperature or vibration kind of sensor, not too sure right now. Would like to make another note. Here is the grounding for all these sensors. It's grounded to the head, and I just threaded the bolt that goes there, so I don't have to worry about losing it or tagging it. And there's another sensor right here. I believe this would be a version of a camshaft position sensor, probably. And at that point, this whole section is loose. And then I'm going to find what else is connected to it and continue the tear down of the wire harness. Alright, so at this point I have loosened these connectors. They go, whoops, this piece, let's see if it focuses, they go in here, just go from behind, pop them loose all the way through. I follow the harness, disconnected some more. Looks like a transmission temperature sensor. This has already been removed. Now there's one more last thing from the harness that goes underneath the intake manifold. Looks like it goes for the crank angle sensor and possibly power steering assist wiring. So I'm not going to go for those right now because I'm still in the process of teardown, so I'm going to do as much as I can from up top. So I've done all this with only my hands and a 10mm deep bolt socket. That's it. So now at this point I need to move up, which I believe this is a 12 or a 13mm for the main power for the starter. Then after that, I'm going to remove the starter itself. They are simply two 14mm bolts. Take this bad boy off. So next step, you're going to see this removed, but I'm going to take this nut and these two bolts off. This one and that one. Alright, at this point in time, the starter came out. Two 14mm bolts. I kept them with the starter. They're not threaded into the starter because the threads are onto the transmission bell housing. But I kept it laid down in the hatch area, so it's not going to move. It just makes the whole thing lighter, because if I start putting up too many bolts, I just feel it's just that much stuff in the way as far as weight and me trying to possibly manhandle this at some point. So that's just what I'm doing. You can thread it in there. It's just two bolts. It's not going to make a big difference. I'm also making a note here. There is a grounding point which goes from the transmission housing to the chassis, and the harness simply goes to your negative. That's it. So now I'm just going to remove that. This is going to be my video reference point, and these bolts I will thread back into place. That's it. Alright, I'll show you the next step. Alright, so at this point I'm deciding to just continue to work up top, and as I shake this harness, I realize that the harness goes underneath the intake manifold and comes right back up this way. It stems off back, I believe, back into the vehicle through the firewall, and then the remaining goes up top right here into the alternator and another sensor, which seems to be another either vibrating sensor or something like that. And then lastly, the compressor startup sensor. All right, so I'm just gonna work up top like I said. Just remove this harness, keep it disconnected, so then I'll either loom it from underneath or keep it out the way. And also what I'm going to do is remove the two coolant lines that go to your throttle body. It's just a heater system that allows the cold air to warm up and allow your engine to get to operating temperatures faster. It is this hose right here and this hose right here, these two. I'm going to remove those from this end. These go to the firewall for your heater core, and one of the small ones stem off of here, and the other small one stems off this piece. It tees off that way. So 4 hoses, 2 big ones from the heater core, and then the 2 small ones right there, these 2 from your throttle body. I'll remove those. Yes, you will get some coolant. You can either let it drop on the floor, the state I am, no big deal. State you are, might want to check. So just to cover it, I'm going to let you know that underneath the radiator there's a little knob. You would turn it, let your coolant drain, and also right here on the block, I'm going to point it out from here, this piece right here, I believe it's a 10mm bolt that is to drain the coolant from your block. So that's going to take a minute. If you drain those two, as soon as you open these two, you'll have minimal to no coolant leaking anywhere. But no big deal for me. So I'm just going to disconnect up here and up here whenever I remove this radiator, which probably be next after the next clip. Alright, as you can see, coolant is coming out. I removed it from the 2 spots, 1, 2, and up here, big one from the heater core, and the return right here, 3 and 4. Okay, I had a little bit of a coolant spill, no problem. Now I'm going to remove it from up here and off the pump right here. So then the only thing keeping the radiator in place are the 2 mounting brackets, 1 and 2. I'm going to remove those 2, and you want to remove the harness, which is, this comes from the vehicle. Come over here, you disconnect it from here, and that should be it. Oh, do not forget your overpressure line right here. So remove that from here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps. Remove this clamp right here that's securing that O2 sensor and the connector for your fans. Alright, next video is going to be out. Alright, at this time I have removed the radiator. I went ahead and the brackets, I flipped them 180 degrees. I just hand tightened the bolts that secure it. Remove the radiator support. Make sure that whenever you before you remove the radiator, you disconnect all these securing clamps. I believe there are 2. Now I went ahead and cracked open this piece right here, which is your coolant drain for off the block. So that is done draining as well, and like I said, I just continue working on top. So now at this point there's very little left on top, although it doesn't seem that way. I just have to remove now the compressor, pull it off out the way. Not going to remove it because there's refrigerant in here. I've done several engine swaps and engine rebuilds to where I do not have to disconnect or drain the refrigerant or disconnect the hoses. I simply push the compressor still connected off to the side, and I always have enough clearance. So now I'm going to remove the rest of the top portion of the harness, and I will proceed to the next step in the next clip. I did not mention this earlier, but it would be good to do so. This is a 5-speed, not an automatic transmission. So at this point, I'm going to remove the slave cylinder, which looks like to be one, maybe just 2 mounting bolts, because this, oh, excuse me, I'm looking off now through the camera. These 2 mounting bolts hold the slave cylinder, what it appears, and then this one bolt secures the line. So I'm just going to remove these 2 first, along with this bolt right here that holds the bracket for the hose. And I'm simply going to set it off to the side underneath here, and it's completely out the way. Alright, at this point, I'm going to remove the throttle body because it has a vacuum hose to a solenoid, and it's going to be in the way. And plus, the throttle body sits way far behind, so in the event that I'm removing the long block, it's going to move forward. That's why I removed the radiator, to get clearance to lift the engine up. The exhaust manifold is going to come off as well, but at this time, not too worried about that. I'm just working as much as I can today, which remember we talked about just taking off the things that you would do during the day to come to a good stop, not leave things halfway, because I don't know, that's just how I work. You can do however you wish, but at this point in time, I'm going to remove the throttle body, which is going to be 4 bolts. They look to be 12 millimeter. This hose, which is your fuel return, goes straight back to the tank. If you notice here closely, it has a, if I can let it focus, okay, it has a ring, free floating ring. It's a lock ring. So I'm just going to push this out like so. Popped out. Now your fuel system may be under pressure, so I recommend wearing some eye protection at the very minimum. And at this point, I'm going to remove this vacuum line from the throttle body because it connects to that solenoid, which in turn goes to other systems, which I really do not need to disconnect. So the easiest option is from here. So I'm going to disconnect this, the 4 bolts, and that throttle body should come off. Okay, I would like to make note that this should pop out, but there's probably a considerable amount of back pressure that is preventing me from just pulling it out. I've tried even putting a flat tip right here and assist. So I'm going to cheat and bleed the fuel system by removing, I already started loosening it, but I wanted to record it. I'm going to cheat by loosening the bolts, wiggle the fuel pressure regulator, and bleed off some of the fuel. So again, be cautious about where the fuel will go as to preventing it from getting into your mouth, skin, or eyes. So at this point, I'm going to just remove the fuel pressure regulator itself from there, and the fuel return line, tuck it in the back and be out of the way for removal. Alright, I'm getting to the point of that there's not too many things to do up top anymore. So it's also getting late. You can see how the sun is going down. So I'm going to do, for now, the 4 bolts holding the compressor, and then at that point, because of the lines are still pressurized and hooked up, I'm going to push it off to the side and secure it, keeping these hoses from getting too stressed from simply holding the weight of the compressor. You don't want that, because all these the ends of it, they're aluminum and they will bend easily. So then you will compromise the integrity of your cooling system, possibly start getting leaks and such. So as soon as you pull that off, simply zip tie it, secure it with whatever you have off to the side to keep these hoses from carrying its weight. And then it looks like after that, it is removal of areas underneath. All right, at this time, I had removed the 4 bolts for the compressor. I want you to take a note that the 4th bolt, or upper right bolt, is directly, or the refrigerant line is directly on top of the upper right bolt, so you're unable to remove it. Not a problem, can't get lost if you can't get removed. And in the process of me removing that, I didn't want to deal with removing the belt by itself just to come back and remove this. And I knew as soon as I removed these bolts, I would be able to tilt it and remove the belt that way. It's just because right in here, that the tensioner bracket is kind of hard to get to. It can be done, no problem, but I just did it the easier way for me. All right, at this point, probably should have done this in the beginning. There's no need for your dipstick, so you can go ahead and remove that. It's at this point just in the way. It is an item that can get broken because it's a plastic tip, and you'll be all around this area working constantly, so it's a breaking point, so you don't want to break that. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that, and the next step would be somewhere underneath. At this point, I have raised the car. Before I raised the car, I broke the torque on the lug nuts on both sides of the vehicle. I'm going to go ahead and remove the wheels because at this time I'm going to start working on components from the bottom. Of what I remember last time I have worked on this vehicle, by choice I'm going to start removing that exhaust manifold downpipe all the way until it makes enough clearance to work by pulling the engine. Alright, so that is going to be next, and I'll show you from the bottom. Oh, at this point I'm taking this off. Like I had mentioned earlier, just never got to. Alright, here we are underneath the vehicle. I'm going to remove this downpipe by removing these 2 spring-loaded bolts right here, and then the downpipe continues. It bridges over the cross member, and then there are another set of bolts right back there that connect to that resonator. So I'm going to remove that, and all it does is just, you have to simply guide it out this way and it'll come right off. I have removed the exhaust manifold and downpipe. Up top, 12mm nuts, 5 of them, and down below from the exhaust manifold to the downpipe, 14mm bolts. Alright, this time I inspected the ports of the exhaust, and number 1 is the one that looks different from the rest. There's just a bunch of oil residual and blackness. All the other ones look fairly dry. See the exhaust valves there, they kind of got that white crust, versus the one on the number 1, they are blacker. All the other ones have the white crust. Some of them show, this one here, they're just down. They're going down, so you can see a little bit of the cleanliness of the oil up to the valve guide. That's all. All right, moving on to the next step. Next step I'm going to do is remove the shifter assembly, the cables. Look down here, this is the bracket. There is 1 and 2 bolts and 2 clips. The alternate way is removing also the 2 clips and then removing these 2 L brackets. They are push pins which secure the whole assembly in place. I'm just going to leave those in there, remove the 2 bolts, and remove the bracket assembly along with the 2 cables, and then bring it up and also push it off to the side to make more clearance. At this point I have removed the 2 bolts I just mentioned, right here. The whole bracket assembly came off, and then I removed these 2 clips that go here onto the shifter bell crank, and That's it. So I just raised it up, now it's off the side. Now the only thing holding this engine into place are the 4 motor mounts. The one in the front, one in the back, and right and left. But for you very technical guys, one in the front, 2 in the back, 2 left and right, and 1 in the back. All right. With the exception of one last thing back here, which is the power steering pump hoses. I'm going to disconnect the power steering assembly from the block, which is 2 bolts from underneath. Trying to keep this thing landscape. I know I messes the video up if I don't. Let's see if I can get a good picture here. Not going to be able to get a very good picture, but the power steering is installed by 2 bolts, and you can access those bolts through the pulley itself. This is a pain in the ass to work on. You cannot access it from here unless you got special tools that can fit at a certain angle for you to get to the bolts and break the torque, and then remove the bolts out without hitting the frame of the vehicle here. So what I'm going to do is remove the motor mount from right here, which is going to allow me to drop the engine more. I might also remove this motor mount from here as well. The whole engine is going to pivot down. It's going to make more clearance for me to work on that power steering pump, and then I'm going to remove it. And then finally, the 2 axles. This axle is a half axle. It goes from your passenger side all the way to this piece right here. Mounts and secures to the block, and then the shaft, or the half shaft, finally drives in to the transmission. This is on the passenger side. Now, you're supposed to, once you remove this, you're supposed to pry it out to make clearance for it, but you're only going to have so much wiggle room from the CV joints. So you have a few options on how to do this. You can remove the whole control arm, allow you to remove this all as an assembly and pivot out, just to make enough clearance for the half shaft to clear from the transmission. But instead of doing that, I'm just going to remove these 3 bolts from here, which secures the arm assembly, and then I'm going to pivot it from there without having to remove your control arm. That's just the way I'm going to do it. You can do whatever works for you. And then same thing on the driver's side, except that it doesn't have a half shaft. It's just from the transmission to the wheel hub assembly. What I chose to do next is the motor mount bracket right here. It used to be this point hooked up here, but not only did I turn it all the way, I also flipped it and turned it. That way, whenever it's time to drop the cross member, it's not fixed coming onto this frame and preventing me from dropping it. I can pivot it and still be clear coming all the way down. So that's the reason why I did that. Also, I drove the mounting bolts right through all the way in, or mostly, for the most point. And now this motor mount is clear. So now there's 3 motor mounts left, axles and power steering pump. Now I'm coming for this motor mount. This motor mount, however, is tricky because there is limited space around here. So you're gonna have to move some things around. For example, I'm going to first off remove this clamp for this AC hose to get more clearance, and then that should be enough clearance for me to take the 2-piece motor mount out. Also, I'd like to mention that underneath I have a jack holding the long block in place, and I put some wood there to prevent metal to metal contact, to minimize and prevent damage to the engine and its components. Alright, so next clip you're going to see that motor mount removed. Alright, this is how that motor mount sits. just like this. It is a two-piece. I had to remove the upper piece first, and then gave me more clearance for the second piece to come out. You can see that there's also a stud in the bottom with a nut, and then two studs that come from your valve, your timing chain case right there. I should say one stud and one long bolt. This one right here. And I threaded the bolt that came out of here to keep it as one assembly. I put down the bolts here. Hard to access right now to put those bolts into place. So I'm just going to keep this like this and put it in the back of the hatch. But for now, I'm going to lay it down right here just to show you one more thing. You have to play with the engine as far as going up and down for clearance, because you have a power steering line, or what seems, yes, it is a power steering line. There's some AC lines that is in the way, so you're gonna have to move the engine up and down, and I'll show you briefly how I did that. I just handle it right here, slowly bleed it, comes down, gives me some clearance. I play with it some more, and I pump it up again to make more clearance for other components. So now at this point, I'm going to carefully bring the engine down, and it's going to rest on that cross member. As I've already mentioned, I've worked on this engine before. This engine is, out of the dozens of engines I've done, this one has the tightest space to work with. Although it's a 4-cylinder, it's pushed all the way to the back. You can see the tremendous amount of gap here, so that makes everything in the back that much harder to work on. For some reason they brought it very close to the frame as well, so it is a challenge for sure, but it is not impossible. They almost want you to pull the engine just about for every kind of internal work, but you can do it in place. Most people don't like to do it. I've done it, but it does present a challenge. So right now I have let off the jack. You can see where nothing is still in contact right here, and it just laid itself down in the rear. So now I'm going to have more clearance. You can see right here the power steering pump is now, or the pulley is now exposed, and see if I can show you. One second. You see probably one of those bolts right now. Should be one right here as I'm touching, and then the other one is right above it. You cannot see it, but you cannot see it with the camera, but you'll be able to locate it if you are actually performing this task, following these steps. So then after that, all you got to do is push this back, and it's going to make enough clearance for you to keep working forward. At this point, the power steering has been removed. As you can see, it's just been pushed back. There are two guide holes, and then in the back end, there's where the bolt threads onto. And I believe I have one of those right here. So they just guide through this one. This one has no threads or anything, and it's cut in half. So it just guides through there, through the pulley, through this piece here, and then threads in the back portion. Take two of these off, 14 millimeter, and you're gonna have to pry this off because it's a tight fit right here. You're gonna have to put something in between and just start wiggling it off, and it'll come out. All right. Last two things, or actually what I'm going to work on now, is the rear motor mount right down here. So all you have to do is access those right there along with this piece right here, which is your CV axle half shaft. You can go ahead and disconnect that as well. And then at that point, once you disconnect the two items I just mentioned, which is a rear motor mount, the CV axle half shaft, the only things holding the long block assembly is the two motor mounts one from the back or on the transmission, and then the one on the front of the engine or over here on the driver's side, depending on what you were taught. And then at that point, all you have to do is remove these 3 bolts on each side to be able to have enough clearance when you pop those CV axles off the transmission. At this point, I have removed the bolt that goes to the back. Now you can see how the engine is teetering, or kind of. Well, now there's only, at this point in reality, there's only one more mount that's holding this engine. This one, the transmission. The one from here is disconnected, the one from the back is disconnected, and this one's disconnected. The only thing holding this side right now is my jack stand. But I'm going to let the engine come down, rest on this side. It doesn't affect anything. I've already checked it. It's good to go on that sense, because what's going to happen is I'm going to remove the axles now from the back, and at that point the engine is going to be completely disconnected, ready for removal. I may even just temporarily hook up this motor mount just to keep it teetering more even in place until I get the engine crane to pull this out. Also, I'm going to remove the hood so that way I don't run into any clearance issues. If you haven't done so, go ahead, and now would be the time to drain your fluids, especially off your transmission, whether it's automatic or manual, because the fluid will come out the axles. So you want to drain that now as a controlled spill, then draining out your axle holes and going all over the place. And then as soon as this stops, I'm going to drain the engine oil as well and pop the axles out. And at that point, hook up the engine hoist. Alright, if you don't see the sun anymore, it's because the things I said I was going to do is easier said than done. I disconnected the axle and I popped it off from this side. Just real quick, I'm going to show you how just dropping off. Like I said, I had mentioned, I removed the 3 bolts from underneath, and that allowed me to pivot the control arm enough to just pop this out. However, the other side, on the half axle, it was not enough to remove those 3 screws off, or two nuts and 1 bolt. It was not enough to remove it to have enough access or play to pull that axle out off the transmission. So what I ended up doing was, because this boot right here at the mid section was already torn, I went ahead and cut the seal from there and removed it from here. And then at that point I had enough play to remove this half shaft out, freeing up the transmission from any other connections. Now let's come up again. Looking at the engine, the only thing holding this engine in place is the cross member, which it is laying on as of now, and the transmission mount. So what I'm going to do is set up the engine hoist, bring it over, strap up the long block along with the transmission, pull the weight out, double check everything around once and twice, and to make sure that there's nothing around still secured, which there is. There is that harness that we mentioned earlier during the teardown, which comes out through the plenum of the intake manifold. There's no other way to remove the harness from the engine without removing that intake manifold off. Now, the intake manifold cannot be removed off a SCION TC without removing all this right here, because there's just not enough space. So what I'm going to do is, while the harness is still through and the intake manifold is still on, strap the engine, lift it just a hair, bring it forward, because look how much play I have here, bring it forward to comfortably remove that intake manifold, and then free the harness off of the engine, and then pull the engine out with it. And then at that point I will remove the transmission from the long block and then put the engine on an engine stand, and I will continue the recording of the teardown of the engine itself and I will be a lot more detailed on that versus the way I have been doing the removal of the engine for the 2009 SCION TC. Alright, next step is the hood. Hood is going to come off so I can start working on removing the engine. However, I am going to tilt the engine forward to attempt to remove the intake manifold from here, because I was just thinking about a secure way to strap the engine would be around where the intake manifold is located at, which at that point I will not be able to remove the intake manifold. So I'm going to tilt the engine forward, just drop the intake manifold down, and so I can clear the wire harness to lift the engine up. I have already dropped the intake manifold, like I said. Another component which is easier said than done, but it is completely doable. Now you have the harness that I just removed. You have this plastic piece that is mounted to a clip onto the block. So that is also a pain in the ass to get to, but once you disconnect it, there is one more sensor back here, which I believe is a knock sensor. Go ahead and unclip that, which is off of this wire harness. And now your engine should be free to go. At this point, I have used my improvised ratchet strap, put it in the middle, and all I have to do is undo the transmission mount, and the engine is going to be free floating, and ever so slightly bring it up while constantly, after every pump, checking for things that may still be connected. Yep. Alright, like right here, I just noticed that there is a grounding strap probably off of this harness. Might want to remove that as well to avoid tearing it. Alright. Here I have removed the hood, and I removed that grounding strap or grounding point. Now I have the ratchet strap up here hooked up. Decided to remove the transmission mount from the frame. Keep everything in one piece just because it's coming up and out, and slowly come up and out. Next, you should see it on the floor, or me dead. Everything's coming along just right. Everything's clear. Still got that intake manifold in there. I'm not too worried about it. Just have to make note that whenever I am installing it, I have to work the jig puzzle, putting the intake manifold in and so on and so forth first. Alright, next video, definitely going to see it out. Alright, at this point, the engine has been pulled off the vehicle. The transmission has been disconnected. The series of bolts just around it. Once you take those, the method I did is, as soon as I pulled the long block with transmission out of the engine bay, I had completely left them hanging, loosened all the bolts around the belt housing for the transmission, and then after that lowered the long block with transmission and then disconnected safely from the floor. And then from there on, I removed the flywheel bolts along with the pressure plate bolts, and I secured those in the vehicle, all in that hatch area. This whole video also consists of space constraints. As you can see, I have to pull my vehicle out every day to work in this area, and I consolidated most of my equipment to make some space on my shelving to put all the engine parts as I disassemble them, because these need to be kept organized, because it doesn't matter how much you think you're going to remember what you're doing. It's going to be very difficult to date yourself back to exactly where it went. So without the use of a manual, which I do have, or video references and pictures, which I'm also using, all cross-reference and will help me make sure I put this engine back together correctly. You're going to have a hard time without all of that, especially organization. Alright, at this time, the owner or client is going to come over and he's going to watch me tear it down So I'm gonna have to explain to him how I am making a documentary on how to disassemble this engine for the YouTuber, since I really cannot find a single video that talks into detail. So if you're watching this video because there is no other video, I apologize for the way I'm making it. That is probably very painful because you want to get through all the steps and cut out all the bullshit. But sorry, I just have to talk because there's people at different levels of experience and they might appreciate all that extra information I'm throwing at them. So you just have to sit back, relax, and subscribe. All right, next we're going to remove the alternator, which is 2 bolts, one right here and one down here, and then it should slide off. Then after that, we're just going to continue taking off accessories to gain access to the timing chain cover and go on from there. The alternator's off. Next steps is going to be, I'm going to take the crank pulley off and the hydraulic tensioner for the accessory belt. Alright, the first target on what I'm going to do is gain access to remove the head, and that entails removing the timing, which before you remove the timing you have to remove this timing chain cover and the tensioner and everything around in the inside. So at that point, the next step is going to be to remove the timing chain cover. You have a series of 10mm bolts that run away or all the way through, with the exception of one 12mm bolt right here. That's what it looks like. Oh, there is a few 12mm bolts, 12 and 10 all the way through. Before we remove this timing chain cover, we're going to flip the engine upside down, and then we're going to remove the oil pan. At this point, I have removed the oil pan. It's just a series of 10mm bolts all the way around. Now we're going to flip it back up to remove the timing chain cover, and I'll show you one more step before we do that. Alright, this is your timing chain tensioner right here, and we're going to go ahead and remove that. You have to remove the tension off the chain before you remove the tensioner, otherwise it's going to jump. Right now it's not a big deal if it jumps because we're redoing everything, but if you want to make sure that you're doing everything right, you have to make sure it comes out slowly because it's hydraulically actuated. That's it. Now at the time of reassembly, you have to lift this lever up, push this piston all the way down until it comes back to the hook. And then we'll get in more detail whenever we are actually putting this back together. At this point, the timing chain cover is off, and I'm going to slowly pan out so you get to see what's going on here. So if your engine looks different, something broke, or if you want to use this video for reference and rebuild later, this is the video you'll be watching. Now you want to pay attention to the crank timing or target plate. You have the F right here, which is for forward. So I'm going to go ahead and flip that so you can see what it looks like if it's installed incorrectly. This is correct. This is going to be incorrect. You see how that changed the target angle, and you no longer see the F. So at that point you would have a no start at that point because the computer cannot understand the timing or the position of the crank for the firing order. Now you can see some slack that was created here is because there's no longer any tension from the tensioner, but if there was, that's what it would look like right there. So at this point, I'm going to remove the guides, the chain itself, and work around to remove the head. Alright, following this video for timing during removal is not as important as to follow it for reinstallation, but just to make a annotation of the spur gear here on its position. I'm going to pull it out and you can see how you have a gap and then the teeth, and there's no ringing on the other side, so you want to avoid installing it backwards like this, because at one point it'll look like you can, like that. You may even be able to put the chain on, because the gap difference, you can see it off to the side, but it'll be ever so slightly, so if you're not paying attention you can actually install everything like that. So make sure that you have it installed this way. And there is if this can focus, it's not focusing. There's a little dot right here, but if you look at the other side, there's another dot, so you got to watch out. Don't just use the dot as a reference. Here the timing chain and gear is removed. The only thing keeping this head in place right now is the head bolts, but before we access the head bolts we have to remove the camshafts. I have cleaned off the camshaft caps. As you can see here on the exhaust side you have a E, letter E. So this one should be E1, this one's E2, E3, E4, E5, and then you have intake I5, I4, I3, I2, and I1. Alright, this time you want to make sure that you record those where they go, because they have to go in the same location. You cannot interchange those. Alright, we're just going to take off the camshaft caps and remove the camshafts, and we'll get to the next step. This time the camshafts along with the camshaft caps have been removed. If you have to flip the engine upside down, be cautious about your lifters right here, these caps, because they are held there by nothing. So if you flip the engine upside down, they're going to fall off. What I'm going to do is clean up the head bolts right here. I'm going to tell you why. If you just go ahead and put a socket in there, there's oil, and you cannot compress a liquid, so that's going to fill in the space of you trying to put the socket in, or your bit all the way through, which is going to turn into you not getting a good grip inside that socket. So that's going to lead you to stripping that bolt head, and that's the last thing you want to do. So make sure you clean up the inside of those bolts before you remove them. Alright, on your intake side you have a camshaft bearing. You have to remove this bearing to access your last bolt hole. And there it just went flying. And right there is your last bolt hole. After the removal of the 10 bolts, this is what you are left with. The engine has been separated, or the head from the short block. You can see right here on cylinder number 1 the issue that we suspected. Alright, at this point we're going to flip the engine upside down to continue the teardown process. And I would like to make note of a plastic liner that's all the way around. It came easily off. I just put it right back in there because I had no place to put it as of now, but I'm just going to remove that and then flip the engine to go ahead and take the counter shaft assembly off. At this point I'm going to remove the oil pump and then the countershaft balance assembly. First, to remove the chain, I have to remove the chain tensioner, which is a 10mm bolt, and then remove the chain, and then from there these 3 bolts, 3 12mm, and then 8 12-point bolt heads. They look to be either 12 or 14mm, and then the whole assembly just comes up and off. I have removed the number 1 piston just from on top and the number 3 piston. The reason I removed those two is because the number 1 piston was the one that had the issue with the culprit, and I removed the number 3 because it's the one that has easy access to, so I can compare both just for comparison purposes. And I'll show you here the findings. Piston number 1 had a crack right in between the oil ring right here. Still trying to figure that out. I'm gonna do some research online and come with an educated guess. To me, it has to do with the oil starvation and increased friction, which turns out into more heat. And at that point, evidently that was the weakest point. You can see how it directly correlates with the area here of friction. So all the rubbing right there ended up probably turning that cherry hot, or enough to weaken it to make it crack in place. It did not come off until I actually just lodged it or dislodged it. And then I compared piston number 3, and that one looks normal. So on the next video, we're going to cover the removal of the lower case right here, which for me, I have to readjust my points right here onto the actual block of the engine. To remove this is going to be a series of 12mm bolts. Some are in deep, some are on the outside. You have to remove the oil filter, and then I will go into detail about removing the oil filter threads, which will uncover the remaining bolt that goes directly in there too. Alright, at this point I'm calling it quits because I have to go to work. To remove this lower case, you're going to have to access or remove all these bolts all the way around. You're going to have to get from the inside of the oil pan, you're going to have to get this bolt. There's a bolt right underneath in here. This bolt. This bolt. To take your oil filter housing, excuse me, your oil filter off. Put that aside. Right here you have a hex bit that you're going to have to install and remove the threads of, or this piece adapter here for your oil filter housing to thread on. That piece has to be removed. This is a tool right here. It is a H12, about this at AutoZone. It would fit just like this. You go ahead and remove that. So I'm going to go ahead and do that first. I'm just going to grab a used rag before I completely remove that and soak as much of this oil that I can. Now I'll go ahead and remove it. I had already broke the torque. Double threaded. And And there is your last bolt that you have to remove this case. You also have this one, and this one. So those are the bolts I'm going to remove right now. I'm going to appropriately tag them for accountability, and you should see this lower case removed. All right, I had pry it off, so now it's just ready to come off. I've used this section right here. There's a little gap, perfect for you to put your flat tip screwdriver in and pry it. There's another section right here done on purpose with a gap so you can put your flat tip screwdriver and pry it. And then all you have to do is wiggle it. Don't pry, don't go too crazy without verifying everything around that has been disconnected, such as your oil pickup tube. Although it's 2 in the afternoon, it's about to rain, so it's getting pretty dark. So I went ahead and sprayed the caps, or the main caps, with brake cleaner. See if I can get this to focus. Okay, it focused, but it's still not picking it up. So I'm gonna have to just explain it. Okay, you can see it right here. Number 2, right there. If you can't see the number 2, then I'm sorry, but it's a number 2 etched onto that cap. Should be a number 1, you can see here, but it's not picking it up. Then a number 3 right there, and then a number 4, and finally etched on number 5. Now look at the design. There's an arrow on that etching housing or surface. Arrow pointing forward, pointing forward, pointing forward. That's how you know which side they face and where they belong. So you don't even have to mark them with anything special. So now the next step is to take those caps off. No, I'll take that back. I'll remove the next 2 pistons right here, which is going to be your number 4 and my number 2. If you did not remove them like I did just to inspect, because I couldn't wait, I really wanted to come to a conclusion. At this point you should be removing all 4 of your pistons. So you want to go also and tag those. Let me just show you here a design real quick on the cap. The connecting rod with the connecting rod end have, specifically on this one, a V matched or stamped, and for example the one over here had a letter R, the one over here had a letter W. Have to look at that. That looks not good. Anyways, it might just be handling marks. I'll get back to that. So that prevents you from putting that cap facing the other way, because you're not matching that letter. Also, don't go off of that number right there. That doesn't mean it belongs to the number 3. That's just their manufacturing codes and processes. All right, next step, you should see the pistons and connecting rods all removed. All right, all 4 pistons have been removed. Just panning out for everybody that wants to look at whatever it is that they want to use for reference. Take note of the oil squirters. You have to remove them before you take that to the machinist, because he will either charge you to remove it or he will not remove it, and he'll cut those motherfuckers off. Alright. At this point, I'm going to remove the main caps. As you see, I already have that 14mm 12-point socket. All caps will be removed, and then out comes the crank. Alright, at this point, the main caps have been removed. We're going to take this crank also to get polished, just because it looks like during the starvation of oil that caused that piston damage, there is some marks of heat friction around. So we're going to go ahead and fix that with a polish, remeasure it and get the appropriate bearings. So right now the crank is just laying there. It's ready to come off. May have to fight with that seal just a little bit, but nothing that's going to stop me from pulling it up. Alright, next you're going to see it off. Alright, here is the crank removed. And I'm going to make note of the thrust bearings. As I haven't removed it yet, so I want you to take note of, you see these two oil galleys, and look if I flip it. No oil galleys. So during reassembly, ensure that you're not installing it like this. You would starve it and it would start grinding here and have all kinds of problems. Make sure it is imperative that you put it facing out. Alright, now the block is just about torn down all the way, and all that's left is the remaining accessories, which is the water pump neck, the water pump, the cooling galley that would go to your firewall, the heater core, knock sensor, some brackets, and some hardware that I had put left and right. And at that point, and the oil squirters. At that point, the block would be torn down completely, ready for machinist. Next, you want to remove the Allen bolt on the oil squirters, piston squirters, whatever you want to call them. It is a 5mm Allen key or bit, whatever you're using. One tip that I would like you to do is to clean off all the oil from inside the hole of the hex or the Allen hole, because you cannot compress fluid and you're going to think you have a good bite in there and it's only halfway engaged from pushing the bit in. So you're only going to have half engagement and you're going to try to break the torque and it's going to spin on you and you're going to create all kinds of issues. So please clean the hole with a Q-tip, throw some brake cleaner in there, make sure it's all open and dry so you can get a good engagement on that 5mm Allen bit and remove your oil squirters. I hate to skip any step of the process for those viewers who is actually watching step by step. I still haven't removed this because it's just been there, but I don't need this one no more. Same thing went for the other one, it already came off. The oil squirters have been removed. I did the method I told you and did not encounter any issues. The torque was not too much. I recommend also at this point, if you have not invested in a good torque wrench, I'm not talking about Harbor Freight torque wrench, I'm talking about a Craftsman at least, or a Snap-on Proto torque wrench is a higher end to be more accurate for reassembly purposes, because you don't want to think that you're torquing it correctly with a Pittsburgh Harbor Freight torque wrench and it's just off, because a $15 torque wrench is not a viable solution for precision installation. Just because it has been getting worked on in a garage doesn't mean that we're not going to do the correct methods. Alright, moving on. Next thing, I'm going to go off of every detail I do, because again, for those viewers actually want to see everything getting done or undone. Now I'm going to remove the water pump. It's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I believe it is 4 bolts and 2 nuts. And then I'll just pry it off, probably through right here, break that seal, and remove the water pump. Then after that, I'm going to remove the thermostat neck This is going to be two 10mm nuts right there. So you'll just see that removed as well. Right underneath, I'm going to flip the engine, and I'll show you more in detail when I get to there then. Okay, I have removed the thermostat and the neck and the water pump. At this point, I'm going to remove the tube that routes coolant to the heater core in the block. That is going to be a 12mm bolt right here and two 10mm nuts. That might be a 10mm nut or bolt, excuse me. Then just looking around, you can see how the block is going to be bare at this point. I am walking around for you to see a once over. This stud, by the book, it calls to remove it, but the threaded portion in here has a lot of tension on it, and it had a Torx head and it snapped off. This was a long time ago. So this stud, although not impeding of any work as of yet, I don't know if the machinist is gonna have that in the way or not my problem, but if I remove it, I'm gonna have to find another stud. I'll attempt to find another stud at the dealership, but that's the issue going on for that right there. If you are able to remove yours, by all means take it off, and I'm going to work around mine as much as I can. Here is a wire bracket clamp that you have your wire harness. Excuse me. You have your wire harness that looms underneath the intake manifold, clips onto this, so you have to remove that bolt. That is a 12mm for sure. Then you have another one right here. This is a 10mm. This piece right here is your knock sensor. Go ahead and remove that. That is going to be a 12mm nut. And you can go ahead and take off the rest of the hardware that you may have around. And lastly, we have these dowel pins. One here and one completely opposing. You might want to order new ones because it is very possible to take them off and reuse them, but chances are you're going to destroy it. I'm going to attempt to remove mine, and hopefully I'm able to reuse it, but if not, then these are just readily available online. I still have not ordered anything for this project because after I get everything from the machine shop, I will get a final determination of the status of the cylinder walls, and that would determine what size pistons and what else I would have to purchase from there on out. So that's at that point, you're not going to see any more teardown because there is nothing else to tear down other than the things I was going to mention. So you're just going to go ahead and remove those, and then you would have a bare block. At that point, I'm going to remove the block from the engine stand and get it ready for shipment to the machine shop. The block is completely stripped, ready for me to pull it out. Now, because of my space constraints, I'm going to have to prop up this chair and tear down the head. Not too much. I'm going to take it to the machine shop with the valves, with the springs, everything still attached to it, because all he's going to do is give one pass, make sure it's, well, a few passes, just to make sure that it's flat, and that would be the end of that. And then I just have to clean it as far as the metal shavings getting into places. So now I have a separate box for all the head hardware to avoid too much of a hoarding on one corner. Keep it somewhat organized by box. So now, as I remove everything, this video is going to be for reference. So that way, although I'll do my bagging and tagging like I had mentioned earlier, as much with as much detail as possible. Sometimes I may have to refer myself back to my own video because it's just normal, things happen. may not remember everything. So that's all it is the variable valve timing solenoid on this side, a camshaft angle sensor. I still don't know what this sensor is right here, but I'm going to find out because that one is really bugging me. Temperature sensor or pressure sensor, and this one is the temperature sensor. And then that should be as far as I'd have to go for removal of things on the head. All right, definitely take out these spark plugs. Don't want those. No, I think I can leave them out or leave them there. They don't interfere with the cutting and probably save me some mess later. Okay. The head has been stripped as far as I want it for the job that I want for the machinist to do. There's nothing else in here for me to remove. You can see how piston number 1 was burning a lot of oil, pushing oil up. All the other ones look normal wear. We have everything removed up here, everything removed over here, everything removed from the bottom, and one more time, the block is fully stripped. Now I'm ready to send this to the machinist, and the next update you're going to see me reinstalling everything. One thing I'm going to do I'm not going to show it here in the video is cleaning all the old RTV, all the old oil, everything that's that used to be there that I don't want it to be there no more. I'm going to talk about the method I'm going to do. You're going to use your method as you wish. Now, all this stuff, I can hit it with a blade if I want to be here for the next 5 years. But what I'm going to do is put a brass wire wheel onto my drill and drill away. It's going to clean off all that RTV. Brass is softer than aluminum, so it will not damage the aluminum. I will have to do that with just about everything. Nothing up here on the head, but mostly on the block where all the old RTV is. And I'm going to have to invest on a bunch of brake cleaner as well for whatever the machinist did not clean, because he's going to hot tank the block. But I'm going to see if I can clean it some further, because once this engine is put back in the engine bay, I'm sure the customer will not just want a rebuilt engine, although that's his main concern. He would like to see a clean looking rebuilt engine. And what I'm going to do off camera as well is remove these dowel pins, and I would suggest one more time, if you remove them and they get damaged, just order some new ones. And if you pull them out and they come out good, then by all means reuse them.